Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? So today I'm thrilled to welcome Dan Gardner, an innovative leader with more than 2 decades of experience designing cross-platform products and brand experiences for clients in North America, Europe, and Asia. Dan is renowned for his expertise at the intersection of digital transformation, emerging tech, and AI, and is the co-founder and executive chairman of the technology-first network Code and Theory. Code and Theory is the only network with a balance of 50% creative and 50% engineers and nearly 2,000 employees across the globe, and is a trusted strategic partner to the biggest brands in the world, including Microsoft, Amazon, and JP Morgan Chase. Dan's been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and MarketWatch, and his efforts have been recognized in global award shows, including the Cannes Lions, the Webbies, and the Effies. Dan is also the co-founder of Discourse, a new membership media company that prioritizes expert-driven discourse to drive perspectives. And he's a member of the Stagwell Marketing Cloud, which is dedicated to developing new, innovative products and services. Dan is radically redrawing the map of challenges a creative agency confront in today's digital world. And so I'm incredibly excited to hear what he's going to enlighten us with today. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you. That's quite the intro. I've never heard it said in totality like that. I'm exhausted.
Well, it's your bio. Well, it's great to have you. So let's get the show on the road with the question that I pose to all of my guests, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
Let's see. That's a good question. I don't know if you could ever actually be future ready, because the whole point of being the future is you're charting areas or opportunity that don't exist. So, how do you conceptually be ready for that? I mean, I think it's more of a mindset more than anything. We had a saying in the early days of Code and Theory that we're experts at doing things we've never done before. And that's kind of like, I think, a mantra which talks to being future ready of like, no one is an expert at something that doesn't exist. And we're literally in the business of doing things that don't exist. So being sort of open and curious and all those things that kind of tie to creativity is really the only way. I mean, as businesses grow and get bigger, they get riddled with different levels of debt. Like it could be cultural debt, it could be technology debt, it could be organizational, like silos and debt. And I think those are inhibitors to being future ready. So I think a relentlessness on operating a company in a way that at least removes or is always fighting against, because you're never at a perfect balance there, but you're always, you have to fight against the things that prevent the ability to actually be imaginative or creative or ready for the changes that are going to happen within the market or technologies that exist that allow that. So I guess it would be that relentlessness to fight against the things that prevent you from being able to change. That's how you make yourself future ready, I guess. It's a journey that never ends is really the answer. Never like, hey, you do a project and now we're future ready. I wish it was.
It's not a destination. I mean, so much of what you said resonates with me. I'm always, telling clients this is a journey, not a destination. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And as I like to say, future readiness is a way of being. It's a capacity and a capability that you can build, but one thing is definitely not is a one and done or annual activity that you check off your list. And so the reason my show is called Future Fit is I'm really trying to make this correlation for people that just how you maintain your physical, mental, emotional, financial, and social fitness. Same thing goes for future readiness, which I think really kind of hits on what you've described.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's like the idea of change. Humans actually aren't naturally comfortable with change. They
Mm-mm.
like the familiar way that you do things, and then it boxes everybody into that mentality. So I agree that it's like a fitness in a way to get yourself comfortable, just like, building muscle. It just doesn't happen. You have to do it all over and over, and different techniques, and you have to switch things up, and you have to do
Yeah.
like there's no simple. There's some science behind it, but not. It's not a just one size fits all, works all the time at every stage of your physical being. So I agree. Future ready, as in your words, is requires ongoing
Yes.
commitment.
Continuous, never ends. And that's why I love the fitness metaphor, because to your point, we know that our bodies constantly need to be challenged and our minds, right? And getting outside of our comfort zone. And so that's why I'm really trying to help people understand that if you think this is just a checklist or something you can go do at an offsite and like you're gonna nail it, like I'm sorry, you're wrong. Like that's actually not what future readiness is really about. Now, you mentioned mindsets earlier, and so I'd love to unpack that angle a bit because as we've been talking about, being future ready is more about it's more than just having knowledge and abilities. It's about cultivating this mindset that thrives in the face of change and continuous learning. It's about seeking new perspectives and challenging yourself. And when you do that, you can think more creatively about the future. You can challenge conventional wisdom and start making unique connections. And so, as someone who's reimagining what a creative agency could be, I'm curious, what are some ways that you prepare your mind for future-oriented, creative, and imaginative thinking? Like, how do you get in the zone?
How do I get it? Well, I can answer in many different ways, but I'll say how I personally get in the zone
Yeah.
is the idea of discourse. I think discourse is the secret ingredient to all creativity. It's, even in the intro you mentioned, I started this organization on discourse that literally is about bringing people together to have difference of opinions, specifically to drive meaningful connections and perspectives. Like it's literally that because I spent over 2 decades building a business where I saw when you get to a trusted place with people and you can really disagree and you value disagreement over agreement. So if someone just agrees with you, it's like that's not helping, doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, it's
And
not
actually,
furthering anything.
yeah, exactly. You look for someone that intentionally can actually disagree because that can challenge you to either reinforce your ideas or come up with new ideas. So to get in the zone for me from like a tactical level, it's discourse. I mean, I literally after I, get going on my day and get my kids off to school and everything, the first thing I do, and I've been doing I've done this my entire career, but since COVID and more remote work, the first thing
Mhm.
I do is with a couple different leaders, we get on the phone every morning at 9 a.m. Sometimes it even starts at 8:45 a.m. And the first thing we do is disagree on everything. And that could be a soft thing that doesn't even matter because it's again the fitness part of it. Hey, let's
Yeah.
argue about sports or something in the news or some cultural thing. And then all of a sudden you move into the real stuff and you're so comfortable with that. And that
Yeah.
just naturally starts broadening your ideas. So discourse is what puts me in the zone. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for people, but it's to me the secret unlock to true creativity.
Yeah, well, that really resonates with me. Diversity of perspectives, challenging assumptions, right? I always joke with people, I'm like, I'm in the business of assumption busting. Like was born a contrarian thinker. And so those are skills that I rely on when I put my futurist hat on or when I'm trying to think about the long term or I'm trying to be a bit more imaginative. It's so important. And I think the other thing that's kind of coming up for me is the role the role of serendipity and how that plays and sort of sparking imaginative and future oriented thinking when you're throwing a bunch of ideas or people or what have you in a room in the largest sense of the word. It's an opportunity for unexpected discoveries, new connections, things that aren't necessarily evident through linear or conventional thinking and processes. And it's getting those alternative viewpoints together, challenging each other, I think is a really great way for anybody, any leader, to quickly start to get those neural pathways going.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, in some ways, process is the enemy of creativity, but you need process to scale things to actually happen. So it's interesting to think about, like, how to break the need for process to make decisions versus using process to give guardrails for efficiency. And I think those two things get confused very easily in the day to day, especially as younger people move through organizations. That becomes a confusion point that I don't think is often thought about in those moments. Am I using process to help me, or am I using process to prevent me from actually making decisions? And when I say decisions, that's really creativity, right? To me, right there, it's like using my mind to think, what is the best decision to do in this moment to have the best outcome that would be most beneficial for whatever I'm trying to achieve. And I think that's a blocker often. And hence back to my point in discourse actually a culture that empowers and embraces that, allows for those moments to happen more often than not, than that complacency of where process just kind of puts people in auto drive to just do what I like to call activities or tasks versus, thinking about outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of really, I go back to what is the job to be done here? And I do think it's important to think of, okay, well, what am I trying to achieve? And am I, is the job to be done to be in a more exploratory space, or am I more in the optimization and efficiency mindset? And by the way, I'm a big proponent. People have to be ambidextrous thinkers in order to thrive today. So you actually have to be able to do both, and you actually have to be able to do both at the same time, which I actually think trips a lot of people up. And one of the things that I do think is missing is people aren't trained to be more T-shaped, to be ambidextrous thinkers. It's information overload and all, and all this information and changes happening so fast. And so that's why for me, it's about how I separate signal from noise, is kind of taking the space and being intentional about really how I spend my time. And I've actually, I do imagination training. I actually teach workshops about imagination training. And we know from cognitive science and neuroscience, your body actually has to be in a rest and digest state, not a fight or flight state, in order to harness your imagination, right? And to harness your creativity. And so I think your point around, people get, especially younger folks, getting bogged down into and not really seeing kind of the difference. I think that's where clarity and well-being and all these things can really make a difference.
Yeah, it's why, I'm often opposed to the idea of like the innovation officer or the innovation person in an organization, because I feel like that is opposite to sort of building a culture of innovation or future thinking or creative thinking within an organization. I find it's a cop out to doing the hard work of ensuring that the people have it within them. And I think you bring up teaching a class, like I often think that our education system just is not set up for any creativity. And I went to school and I did a lot of art, and even that, like, application of creativity in activities, I think shows up in school. But the idea where people are boxing, or teachers or professors are boxing people into sort of a guardrail of how to actually do something, it actually just it prevents someone from like developing that from early on. When you look at like younger kids, and it's obviously, this isn't the first time it's been said, younger kids are like unencumbered by any of that stuff.
Right.
And then teaching them and sort of thinking that's the best way is like kind of this like rigid like structure in everything you do, up to the point where you get to in your entry level job, and then you're in a big organization, and then big organization has you doing very specific tasks, and you're growing up sort of in a professional world that is like valuing that over sort of this unencumbered way to actually solve problems. So it just gets exacerbated larger and larger. And it's why
Yep.
you see most companies can't think like that. I would even make an argument to say most creative, quote, creative companies actually are not creative because they follow the same frameworks
Right.
of activity driven guardrails that prevents people actually from like thinking bigger and thinking outside those processes and activities they need to do. And it's not actually creativity what they're doing. They're just doing tasks. And most
Right.
big companies, again, even in traditional ad agencies, they are set up to do tasks at scale.
Yeah.
And that's it's just it's a different mentality when you think about future ready. I'm gonna keep using your word. I just don't know how in a world where the definition of creativity is actually being challenged naturally by technology,
Yeah.
how organizations survive if they are not set up to be creative, or their definition is lacking of what creativity means.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I couldn't more agree. And well, welcome to my world and the conversation that I'm having often because I candidly find it's a lot of BS and a lot of lip service out there. I talk to a lot of leaders who are saying one thing around their creative capacities, their imaginative capacities, their innovative capacities, their future ready capacities. And then when I start to sort of dig under the hood a little bit, I'm like, okay, wait, and ask questions and get curious. Right. And I'm like, all right, I don't know if if this is actually a value versus a buzzword, right? The other thing that's sort of coming up for me is this childlike wonder, this beginner's mindset is so important. I think one of the most popular posts I ever did on LinkedIn was around this study that said 4-year-olds and boozed up grown-ups were more creative than the average NASA scientist. It's like, right? So either have to be drunk or a 4-year-old in order to achieve the level of creativity of what's needed to solve a problem for NASA. Like, to me, that's pretty shocking, right? That the systems and the infrastructure of business is really beat it out of people. And I personally feel it I always say I'm a misfit outlier who colors outside the lines, right? And it can be isolating if you are a nonconformist thinker who is challenging the status quo and who is always questioning pre-existing processes, not just to be a pain in the ass, right? But it's more just to be from the perspective, well, what if? What could be? Like, why don't we at least have the conversation and we still realize that a certain process is needed, but to your point about imagining the future, the future is a place, that is here, but yet there's so much of it that is undefined. And so instead of trying to predict it, which you can't, and we'll get into in a moment, it's like you have to just cultivate this ability to be open to all the possibilities and adapt as things evolve.
I agree with. I mean, first of all, I like to call them fake experts, and I've thought a lot about this. It strikes me pretty funny, even when I go to events like Cannes, for example, and the sort of topic du jour of whatever that year brings to it, and how all of a sudden everybody is an absolute expert in whatever that topic du jour is in, as if they were doing it forever and they have the full solution. Their whole agency is organized around this concept, but if when you go panel to panel in in those moments, the talk track is exactly the same. Like literally, it's the same thing. Now you could just use AI to basically output one of those panels. That's how generic it is, and it
Yeah.
strikes me like, where is the expertise in that? Where is the unique value, and most importantly, where is the creativity? And the reality is, most of the times, it's not there because they're already talking about stuff that was over the last year, not about what's going to happen in the next year. And where it is, it's so superficial. And I just find it shockingly like absurd, and how look, the world doesn't like change, and the world really doesn't like discourse, to be honest, as well. And those panels do not have true challenging to get to the meat of what they're actually talking about, or challenge them to the fact that they don't know it because they don't want to, that it's not set up for that. So you go to these creative festivals and they're not truly set up to actually have that dialogue.
Have the
Um,
dialogue.
Yeah. And like at Code and Theory, it's like from the beginning, we have created a place internally where we look for that. Because and the same with On Discourse. I intentionally created On Discourse because I'm like, this is so unique in what we have inside Code and Theory. This can be even broader if we create a community for it. Because when I go to these events or I speak to people, I just do not see it. I do not see people's welcoming of actually disagreement, people's welcoming to have humility that they may not
Yes.
know all the answers,
Yes.
actually have curiosity to ask questions, not always like think you know what the answer is, and truly have broader perspective that is outside the constructs of what is familiar in the last couple of years. Like all of that, just I don't see it enough out there. And I just think there's like huge opportunities. And when we think about like even at Code and Theory, like transformation, what's happening within businesses, what's happening within technology, how we solve whether it be marketing problems, whether it be service problems, like it's just a wide open space. And it takes people on the client side as well to understand that and be creative. It's
Right.
a partnership for that to happen. And there's just a void right now, almost more so than I've seen since when I started the company in 2000. It's the closest to 2000 where it's like the gap to what is happening to what the dialogue is could not be further away. Again, probably back in 2000, it hasn't been this size of a gap.
Yeah, I couldn't more agree. And that's one of the reasons I started this show is because I wanted to have conversations with people. I was not this BS vanilla buzzwordy, like, because I too see a massive opportunity. I mean, I've been a strategist and I've led transformation for 20 years, but I've really leaned into the futurist part of what I do because to me, uncertainty, when cultivated in the right way, is your biggest strategic advantage. And companies and leaders, right and left, are so focused on the short term. I say short termism is a disease. You'll notice I make lots of health and fitness metaphors and analogies because I think it's a great way to start to help people understand. Well, just like if you don't think about the long-term implications of your lifestyle choices and how that could significantly increase your chances of getting cancer and chronic disease. Guess what? Same true goes for your company, right? And the health of your company and its growth trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could disagree because I feel more comfortable in the disagreement side of this, but yeah, it's amazing. I think the challenge is right now, creativity historically has been offloaded to either a group in an organization or an external agency. And even in the external agency, the creatives, as like quote unquote, would be referred to. And I just think all of that is wrong. It's all wrong. Like the idea of creatives being a singular group of people to
Right.
solve problems seems very strange to me. There's people that maybe have creative skill sets like drawing or art directing, but that doesn't mean an engineer can't be creative. That doesn't mean the most creative people I've ever met are actually like operators of companies.
Yeah.
They're not actually like the cool, like Brooklyn creative type
Yeah.
person.
Art director.
Yeah, they're just the most creative people I've ever met are just random people in random positions that are succeeding in their position because they have a creative like first approach to how they actually make their decisions from a day to day. And I think just the idea of like quoting a group of people to be creatives seems like fundamentally wrong to the truest sense of creativity, especially now when like technology is so important. And this is to me the other laughable thing of like,
Yeah.
the landscape all of a sudden I joke, and it's sort of a joke, but it's actually I think there's some sense of
Funny but
truthful.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, I just joke that like, okay, now that AI is something that is front and center, all of a sudden agencies are now just now coming to go, yes, technology powered creativity is a thing. It's like, no, this has been a thing that you've relegated down to a tactical output when you say I could do digital stuff, but you could just make a digital thing. You've missed the entire point for the last couple decades. And now all of a sudden, you're an expert at technology and creativity. Like that is a discipline in like you say in any type of creative thinking. How do you actually be creative in technology and how technology can be creative? Like that merging is something that just doesn't happen in 1 year because AI is now front and center in the topic du jour. That happens by building into the culture. Again, everything that happens at Code and Theory is intentional. It is not unintentional that of the 2,000 people we have, 50% are technologists and 50% are more on the creative side, but they're all creative. And if you ask them, they would feel that they're creative. We're solving it together. It's the end that makes it.
Yeah.
And for N to be true, for the math people maybe listening, they both have to be true.
Yeah.
Or only one has to be true, and they both have to be true. So you can't have creative and technology not being equal, both being true. If that doesn't happen, it will not be true. And that's the sniff test I can say in any agency or any company that likes to think that they understand technology and AI and the future. If they don't have the balance and they're both at high functioning, creative perspectives, they don't have it. Yeah. That goes on to the fake expert side. And that is intentional, as intentional as creativity and imagination, future fit and future ready. All of that intentionality has to be there. And that has to be over time, not just a moment, because it's the du jour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the intentionality part is really key, and what keeps coming up for me as you're talking, and you mentioned it through the lens of chief innovation officer or someone like I always say, no, everybody is responsible for innovation. Everybody is responsible for imagination. Everybody is responsible for creativity. And so I totally agree, like siphoning it off. And there might be a group that executes creative deliverables, but that is not the same thing as a creative capacity and capability that is actually infused through an entire company.
I agree. I mean, I just think like the future of work, the future of the workforce is going to require a skill set of creativity and defined very specifically on what creativity is, because anything that isn't human inventive, like that your brain can come up with a concept that isn't generic basically, and making decisions in a moment that require something that isn't just mechanical in nature, like that's the future, especially in the quote creative workforce. That is the only thing that will exist. Anything else that falls short of that is, to me, when we're thinking about the future, incredibly naive. It's just incredibly naive. And you cannot, I like to say this, you cannot fight technology. Technology is undefeated, and it will play the long game, and it will win. And you can have some you have some short-term strategies that maybe fight that, but long-term, it will win. And if you as an individual or a company are not thinking long-term in the idea of what like is uniquely human, which, by the way, I don't even know if I fully know the answer to that. That's something that I'm like spending a lot of time on thinking about, like workforce on. But unless you're at least pointed in that direction, talk about future ready for a future that is challenging the notion of what it means a human can do. Unless you're not thinking that relentlessly, you're probably going to be in a challenged situation. And industries change. We've seen this even in the 23 years of Code and Theory. I've seen industries crumble because people don't want to face the reality. They want to be scared of it. And they're not actually being creative to the point of creativity to think about where is this going and what is your unique ability based on the context of your life and your ability to actually prepare you for what is going to the future and experimenting that way. So to me, it's Code and Theory. We're so focused on like that. Like what makes us, where are we going to use technology that will replace our ability to superpower our ability? And I'm not just talking about the talk track of, oh yeah, AI is going to like augment humans. Like, I'm not talking about that. I mean, that is an element of it. I'm talking about what is uniquely human. Like that is, and I also believe, and this is like could be taken as a scary statement. I also believe very strongly that we will not tell the computers what makes us uniquely human. It's actually the other way around. The computers, AI, robots, whatever you want to classify this, will tell us, because they will either be able to do it or they won't. And when they can do it, they're telling us they can do it probably better than you. Then what can you do better than that? And that is the point where you start to realize the fork in the road of what makes you unique and what it makes the computer unique or not, or better. It's not even say unique in that way. And that is a relentlessness approach to being open to finding that answer, that maybe you never find the answer, you keep working at it and it keeps evolving to that point.
Yeah, everything that you just said really, really strikes a chord with me. I mean, one of the things that I talk about a lot are, so my approach to envisioning the future's possibilities is actually non-traditional and is actually rooted in intuition and imagination, with well-being as the foundation. Because if you're not taking care of yourself in all of its forms, then you're not going to see what I see. Like, I actually went on a personal transformation journey where I rewired who I am as a human being over the course of 6 years, and invested a lot of time and money in psychotherapy and executive coaching. And now who I am today is very different than who I was 7 years ago. And now it's gotten to a point where this capacity development that we're talking about and this capability, I mean, there were pieces of that were intrinsic because I'm human, but it's now how I operate and the way that I see things and the dots I connect or the questions that I ask or how quickly I can move on things is I wasn't like this, to the full extent all of those years ago. I had to do a lot of work to get to where I am, but this is why I believe so passionately in what I'm doing and the conversations I'm trying to have around these things, because data is everywhere. Data is not the competitive advantage, right? It's how do we take that information and start to connect these dots and look at it in a new way and take that information and know which information is actually the information we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on one thing, but then I do have a point of disagreement that I'll put there. I do, as a small note, I agree that very few companies could probably claim data as a differentiator. So I agree with you on that. And most likely, if you're listening, more than likely than not, your company probably doesn't have it as much as you think it may have it, at least long term, maybe short term, but not long term.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if I philosophically agree with you is, and I'm not saying nothing's like absolute. It worked for you. It seemed to work and you feel like you're in a better place. But I have found that in the transforming oneself, let's call it, I feel like if using sort of methodologies as a crutch to transforming oneself, it falls into the rigidity of the problem that exists that got one there in the first place. I think there is a point where maybe that could be helpful. I'm not against executive coaching or like psychology or any of that stuff, but I think that actually people use that in the beginning, and actually that's maybe used at the end when you're sort of open and you've already started that journey and you have an openness and curiosity that realizes that, to the humility part, that you are not a perfect person, that you do not know all the answers, that maybe you could improve in areas that you could never. Only once you're at that point can maybe those like philosophical constructs, I believe, really actually help you. I've seen it just too often, too early stage, where it feels good in the moment because, like I said, from education, it feels good to be taught. Everybody likes to be taught in the construct, and everybody likes the activities of learning. So it feels good, but then the application of it doesn't actually transform most people. And within a year or two, they're sort of like back into it never really changed them, to be honest. Maybe gave them tools they could have used, and maybe they do apply it forever, maybe, but I don't think it fundamentally has that transformational ability. I think the only way for that to happen is it's like the first step is you have to have openness, and that has to come within. It's like an alcoholic realizing, okay, I need to get help. You can't help an alcoholic that doesn't realize they need help. I think there's the start of like, hey, I just want to be open and I just want to be better at be creative or engaging or whatever. Creativity is such a broad range on what it means. The big C creative in that. I think that, and then the second phase of that, I think, is surrounding yourself and allowing you open enough to get the feedback from the people you trust that are good enough to actually be honest with you, even if at time it's brutal. This goes back to the discourse thing. They could disagree with you, and you are welcoming that, to welcoming it to the point where they're going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Then you can supercharge it, because then you start becoming superhero in the ability that you can actually see things in different ways, or you can see that your mind can change like that. Like once you get to the point where you are passionate in what you believe, but you're like, it's so loosely, it's like a weird thing. Like we sometimes talk about like, super passionate, but loosely held, where it's like, it looks like you're like a crazy person, but actually you can change your mind like that
Yeah.
because you're so open and actually you're a crazy person to get to that point of, was I right? Was I wrong? Should I change it? Was I slightly right? That's a long way to maybe disagree with your philosophical sort of like way to working there. But I actually think you got to reverse it. And it doesn't start from ground up. It starts from like your moment that you're in.
Or you could be like me, and I had an inciting incident, a transformational moment when my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I spent a year talking to the top disease experts around the world around what causes cancer and chronic disease. And I came to the realization that how I was living as a type A overachiever, working 100 hours a week, and the stress and the not taking care of myself and all this other stuff. Holy shit, that I don't want to be my mom who has pancreatic cancer. What can I do to change my future? And so really my journey wasn't even, the goal wasn't even to change how I worked, right? It was actually to change how I lived and how I moved and showed up in the world. And what was the total unexpected surprise is how much it influenced and benefited the work that I do, which again, it was not the journey that I set out on at all.
Yeah, I guess then maybe we are agreeing. I mean, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your mother and
Oh,
pancreatic
thank
cancer.
you.
Actually, my grandfather had pancreatic cancer as well, so I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Yes.
Yes, but I think that probably goes to sort of the analogy. I hate to go in the dark side of all this stuff, but like the alcoholic realize having a
Yeah.
moment.
No,
It's
it's a
something
great analogy.
because it starts at that. It can't just be like, hey, I'm gonna one day get an executive coach and be a better executive, or I'm
Right.
one day gonna go, hey, I just want to be more creative. How am I gonna be
Yeah.
creative?
No, it doesn't start that way.
No, and that's what I mean. It starts from more of like a human side that whether it's a catalyst moment, I mean, typically it's probably going to be a catalyst moment, unless you're like born into it a little more. I hate to say that like trauma in general does, I mean, I've
Yeah.
had, without getting too personal on a podcast, but I grew up in like a displaced parents and I have all these things. So I think I just
Yeah.
always kind of I never had a moment where it was like, oh shit, something happened. It just always was around me. And it's not my story is not an uncommon story to a lot of different entrepreneurs that I met in life or successful business people where it's like, oh, they come from like homes that weren't like perfect. So it could be a moment like, unfortunately, like cancer, or maybe it's a early childhood. But it's interesting that those are the things that bring out perspective in the most positive
Yeah.
outcome on a
Yeah.
negative situation. Those are the things that create, which again, I hate to bring it back to discourse, but it's a different form of discourse, something that gives a different perspective that you don't want always in that moment to output. That's why I say it's the secret ingredient to all creativity is
Yeah.
discourse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I tell people that my mom's diagnosis was the worst thing that happened to me and also the best thing that ever happened to me, they're like, what are you talking about? It's hard for people to comprehend again. And it goes back to holding these two concepts that seem to be in total conflict in your mind at the very same time, right? And then I just happen to be the person that, okay, how can I use this as fuel, right? And how can I sort of channel this into a different future for myself?
Yeah. Well, I think, I did go to a psychologist once and I was like talking about some negative stuff and I'm like, but I'm okay. I have a great family. I've done pretty well in my life in business. I'm happy in all those ways. And so it couldn't be that bad from this like traumatic early childhood. And it's like, yeah, some of it is luck. And you took this
True.
bad thing and in some ways it's luck that you had the perspective to take this moment and what could have drowned you and drowned lots of bad stuff drowns people. You luckily had the presence of mind, I guess, to find a way, and maybe it took over time to get you there. That is a positive thing. And I think to center it back to maybe business, oftentimes I think about like failure. It's been said so often in business books, and everybody's like, you need failure for success. And obviously I believe in that, but I think very tactically I've thought a lot about it, like more than just the obvious statement of like failure to success is like failure, it should be looked at as a return on investment.
Right.
So like whether it's a traumatic moment, okay, that's not failure, that's like, whatever. But there is and I hate to make it an investment. I'm not trying to make it like a capitalist thing, but what is the good that could come out of something that is bad? And in business, you make a mistake. What is the good that could come out of it? The
Because
good
it's
is
there.
you learn something, maybe it gave you new perspective, even more than just learning something. Like maybe it taught you a lesson a certain way. Maybe even the bad thing actually turned out to be a good thing because actually it had forced you to have a conversation with a client in a different way that also unlocks some new sort of thing. Like if you take every moment and not just say, yeah, you need failure for success, because that's like an obvious thing, but actually think about what about the failure, again, being intentional about it, can create a return on its investment. You're investing in a failure. And what is that return that you hope to get? And if you think about more intentionality in it, it's amazing how you can sort of get yourself out of those ruts of this fucking sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was sharing with somebody the other day. It's like, I mean, I'm a big proponent of embracing failure, celebrating failure, talking about failure, to your point of discourse. And back in my agency days, I used to run postmortems after every project. And like people loved them and they were like great conversations. And then it was interesting when I started working with corporates and startups, and I would try to introduce let's do a postmortem. Like, and they looked at me like I had 10 heads, both sides of that coin, because they weren't willing to subject themselves to the vulnerability, the humility, to your point earlier, that's required when you start to ask questions of what went wrong and why did it go wrong, and then what can we take away from this, because there is something to be learned in everything.
Yeah. And it's even small, like small moments. It's just everything. Hence why surrounding yourself with people that are going to challenge you is the most important thing, because that challenging gives you the perspective to come out of it. So I'm almost like annoyingly relentless talking about it because it's to me so important. And it's I just don't see it talked about enough with all this like stuff on like how to be creative, how to be successful in business. It's like disagree
Yeah.
as much as possible. That's how to be successful in your career.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway is disagree. I love that. I love it in its simplicity and its boldness. And yeah, I think that's a great lesson for anybody who's listening. Now, we only have a few more moments. Is there anything, because I know we've covered a lot of ground, is there anything specifically that you want to share?
I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, like, look, at Code and Theory, I'm focused on very simply, it's like, the best people and the best people working together. And it's like that simple. And the best people are the creative people that have openness and curiosity and all those things. And obviously they have skill sets of like history that like helps bring their perspective in a way that can challenge other perspectives. Like that's what I'm focused on. Obviously, we have a new revolution happening that is both, I like to say, a bubble and the most important technology we'll ever see. That's happening. So I'm focused on putting in technology both at Code and Theory and our clients on where the puck is going. I think that it's insane to me, the dialogue, whether it be in the media or whether I see at these events or even in talking to other business people, how many people just can't think about where the puck is going with this. They're all reacting to what it is today, not where it's going. And I am trying my best and having Code and Theory try its best to really be focused on that. Like, how is it going to change, for example, CX? Like, what is the experience interactions that a business can have with its customer that is going to be different in the future? And how does that relationship look different? And what can we do now to own that relationship in a meaningful way and what's happening in the broader ecosystem to know what will be more generic versus what we can own? Like in a year from now, you could assume certain things will happen, which means you can't own, most likely you can't own it. So what could you own if you could assume some of that generic stuff happened? So I'm focused on that. I'm focused on internally thinking about how can technology break down traditional silos. So we talk a lot about like bringing the CMO, the CTO, and CIO together. Like we are the place where that happens. And what does that mean? And how does technology enable it? Because the two things I really believe on is one, businesses will be able to communicate more efficiently and effectively with each other. Like technology is going to help that. And technology is also going to help businesses make decisions that are closer to consumers. That means I make a decision and it actually happens and is meaningful to my customer quicker and faster. So we're very focused on that from like when we talk about transformation. Transformation, by the way, digital transformation is the most overused two words in the industry. I started Code and Theory in 2001. I mean, our name is Code and Theory. It's about technology and creativity coming together. But digital transformation wasn't even like a thing back then. It was like grew into that. And for me, it really actually means like digital first strategy. It's like it's a strategic thinking, it's behaviors, transforming something, meaning it's different than it was before, whether it's like how organizations work together, how they action on things, what the meaningful relationship with its consumer. It's not just putting something online. That is not like digital transformation. So I really focus on where the puck is going, and clients that are bought off into that concept of where the puck is going, how they operate, and how they engage with their customers.
Yeah. Well, as I always tell people, you need to stop thinking present forward and you need to start thinking future back. And I think that's a lot of what is happening today for various reasons. There's a lot of blockages to future mindedness, but I admire and appreciate that you're willing to disagree and have those discussions and find those clients who are on the bus, as I like to say, because I personally am done running over people in the bus. So either you're going to get on it or you're not. And I feel like, even though it might take longer, there's something about creating cascades of momentum that can then hopefully eventually start to have a bigger impact and influence. But, you said it earlier, change is scary. People don't like change. I have a bone to pick with that because I think that's bullshit. I think it's laziness and complacency and it's ego. Right. But I'm thankful for you coming today and sharing your perspectives, because it is a reminder to me and inspiring that there are other people out in the world who are willing to have these conversations and try to and doing things differently in a way that will actually lead to change and transformation. So.
Well, thanks for having me. I'll plug on Discourse for a second. That is literally a community for people that want to create meaningful relationships and perspectives around discourse and disagreement. So it is literally meant to find a place where you can do that in a very productive way.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to share about where people can go to find more about you and your work, Dan?
Well, I'd say codeandtheory.com. It says it all. Maybe some LinkedIn following. Probably learn about our day-to-day stuff.
Great. Well, we'll be sure to add that to the show notes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights, Dan. It's been enlightening, and I've had so much fun exploring with you today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.